It's the third planet from the sun. A tiny blue sphere spinning for a moment in time. A remarkable place that was kind enough to yield just the right elements to sustain a phenomenon called life. Where each creature is as unique as this world we call home. And a day begins in much the same way for all. Maybe that's when it crosses your mind. In the warmth from a ray of sun, or the kindness of a stranger, it occurs to you how one life touches so many others. And you begin to see how all things are connected, like the blood that unites one family. And you come to realize that mankind did not weave the web of life. We're merely a strand in it. And whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves on the third planet from the sun.
These are the Achuar people, one of our planet's most remote indigenous groups. The Achuar are an ancient dream culture still living in harmony with their ancestral land, nearly 2 million acres of pristine tropical rainforest in Ecuador and Peru. In the late 1980s, the Achuar elders and shamans began having dreams and visions that a grave threat was coming to their people. The Achuar soon realized what that threat was as they began to see what contact with the outside world and its thirst for oil was doing to the land and cultures of their indigenous neighbors. And so the Achuar made a bold move. They reached out to create a partnership with the very world that was threatening to destroy them.
In 1995, a call issued forth from the heart of the natural world that was heard thousands of miles away by a small group of people in the modern world. In the summer of that year, in a remote village in the rainforest, these two worlds came together, and the Pachamama Alliance was born.
From the very beginning, our indigenous partners told us that it was really, really great that we were working with them in the Amazon shoulder to shoulder. But that was only half the battle. They told us that if we really wanted to protect their lands permanently, we would need to go to work in our part of the world. And as they put it, we would need to change the dream of the North, the dream of the modern world. A dream rooted in consumption and acquisition, without any regard to the consequences to the natural world or even our own future.
Changing the dream of the modern world is certainly a daunting, and some would even say an impossible task, but we took the request of the Achuar very seriously. Out of our work with them, we came to see that we in the modern world truly are in some kind of a trance, living in a dream that's threatening to destroy not only the rainforest and their way of life, but the health and well-being of our entire planet. Our society is on a completely unsustainable path, and experts everywhere are saying that we have a limited time to turn things around.
So in response to the request that came from its indigenous partners, the Pachamama Alliance created this symposium, Awakening the Dreamer, Changing the Dream, now being offered by thousands of volunteers in dozens of countries around the world. The purpose of the symposium is an audacious one, bringing forth an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, socially just human presence on this planet.
The intention is that by the end, rather than seeing these as three separate issues, you see them as interrelated facets of one profoundly interconnected whole. And that you not only understand the scope and urgency of the planetary situation we face, but you also see that the possibility of our times is greater than the crisis. The goal is that you leave here in a state that could be described as blessed unrest.
The main purpose of the Awakening Dreamer program is to create a cadre of global citizens that are awake, people who are engaged in the conversation of what's it going to take to create a new future, and that also have the ability to see that the future is not something that's just we're going to live into, but it's something that we can actually create.
Indigenous cultures throughout the world have legends and prophecies that identify this time we are living in as a turning point for humanity. One such legend is found throughout much of the Americas, the prophecy of the eagle and the condor.
According to this prophecy, the eagle is the bird that represents cultures that have used the creativity of the mind and scientific insight to harness the wonders of technology and increase material wealth. The condor represents more spiritually oriented societies, those that are deeply in touch with the sacredness of the natural world and the interconnectedness of all things.
This legend said that every 500 years we'd go through cycles. And the last cycle began at the end of the 1400s, roughly the time of Columbus. And it was predicted that during that cycle, the eagle would dominate. But within 500 years, that cycle would start to change, and the eagle and the condor would fly together in the same skies.
Esta profecía dice que diferentes pueblos, diferentes culturas van a unirse con un solo principio, la de vivir en forma más humana cada vez, la de vivir con una forma de respeto a la Pachamama, a la madre naturaleza, un respeto grande entre todos nosotros.
Creemos que todo ser humano necesitamos y tenemos la necesidad y tenemos que integrar, interrelacionar entre los mundos diferentes, pero sin menoscruir lo que es el conocimiento propio. Tenemos que interrelacionar esos dos conocimientos. Y los buenos recoger, rescatar y los malos rechazar, pero para el bien común del pueblo achuar y por qué no decir del mundo entero.
Given that our purpose is bringing forth an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, and socially just human presence on this planet, the first question to ask is, where are we? In other words, what kind of world is our modern way of life actually producing?
Answering that question and confronting the realities it reveals may not be comfortable, but as we'll see, it is an essential first step to revealing what may be the greatest opportunity any generation has ever faced.
One place to begin is with the dramatic changes that have occurred in human population. For thousands of years, human population on Earth remained relatively steady. Then, about 200 years ago, at the time of the Industrial Revolution, humans learned how to harness the energy of fossil fuels. That allowed agriculture productivity to increase dramatically, and human population began to grow exponentially.
Since then, we in the modern world have attempted to meet our needs and wants through an ever-expanding process of extraction, production, consumption, and disposal of natural resources. The modern industrial system that resulted has made possible great human achievements in many areas, but it has also brought about grave and deepening crises. The global environment is being significantly degraded and is now threatened by climate disruption.
Poverty is increasing, and the gap between rich and poor is widening. And it is apparent that increased material wealth has not produced the personal fulfillment human beings so long for. In addition, the global economic downturn that began in 2008 could be evidence of a system on the verge of breakdown.
If we look at the record of the last 25 years, we would say that on this counts, economic vigor, in terms of inequality, in terms of poverty, and in terms of sustainability, this mode of production has been a failure.
How did this happen? Given all the ways economic and social progress are measured, why did we not see this coming? Perhaps it's because the way we measure progress doesn't really measure progress at all.
Gross domestic product, GDP, is supposed to, be a measure of everything, puts a value on everything that's been produced in an economy within a year's time. But what that doesn't measure is the fact that in order to achieve that gross domestic product, there's also a lot of destruction of natural wealth. And one can in fact say that the greater the GDP of a country is, measured conventionally, the more natural wealth, either in that place or globally, has been destroyed.
The current industrial model requires continuous economic growth. But is that growth sustainable? And what do we mean by sustainability anyway?
Sustainability is the ability of the current generation to meet its needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet theirs. Since 1972, the United Nations Environment Programme has been periodically reporting on the Earth's vital signs, and the conclusion: in every natural domain, the Earth is under very severe stress.
We're in a real dangerous moment in history. Virtually every natural habitat across the planet is being degraded. We've got climate disruption. We've got deforestation of the rainforest and the other forests of the world. We've got soil erosion. We've got the draining of underground water aquifers, the polluting of our rivers with poisons. We've got the overfishing of the oceans of the world. We've got the toxic burden in people's bodies, the rates of cancer that are going up. These are all big-ticket global ecological issues, and what they're doing is they are shredding the fabric of life that basically creates the life support systems, the ability of the planet to support our life and future generations.
The demand for unlimited growth on a planet with limited resources is clearly unworkable. One place where this is showing up is with the resource that made this whole system possible: oil. Many experts say that oil extraction worldwide is about to reach its peak. Peak oil is the term they use.
The academic researchers, who are much more likely to be independent and hard-headed in their analysis outside the oil industry, believe that peak oil probably in the area of a 2010, 2015, something like that. And after that, we begin to see a reduction in the supply, but an acceleration of demand. It is impossible to believe that that will not happen. It is going to happen.
It is clear that the resources of Earth are being used up. Their critical questions become how much and how fast. One useful measurement system is called the ecological footprint.
The ecological footprint is an accounting tool, not for money, but for ecological resources. So it compares how much nature we have and how much nature we use. There's only one planet. That's why the line of supply is very, very horizontal. Humanity has been continuously increasing its resource demand to the extent that by the mid-80s, we've started to use more than what nature can regenerate. And by 2007, humanity used about 30% more than what nature can renew. So we have been in global overshoot.
Overshoot can be thought of as living off of your credit card. You know, humanity's living off its ecological credit card. If we use more than nature can keep up with, we actually start to erode natural capital that life depends on.
Currently, if everyone on Earth lived as North Americans do, we'd need 5 Earths. For everyone to live as Europeans do would take 3 Earths. In other regions, people are living beyond the capacity of 1 Earth as well. China and India are presently living just under the 1 Earth level. But given the rapid industrialization and economic growth of both countries, that's sure to change.
One of the consequences of our modern way of life is the increasing amount of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere, caused primarily by the burning of fossil fuels.
The scientists around the world have come together to tell us that climate change is actually happening at a much faster rate than they had first anticipated. The signs of this are the cataclysmic storms, the extremes in weather. The polar ice caps are melting, and it means that the entire ecosystem is in peril.
This really isn't about polar bears anymore. At this very moment, the fate of civilization itself hangs in the balance. It turns out that the way we've been calculating the future impacts of climate change up to now has been missing a really important piece of the picture. It seems that we are now dangerously close to the tipping point in the world's climate systems.
Tipping point means that, in the context of climate change, that after a certain temperature rise and certain other impacts on the global ecosystem, certain things change that cannot be moved back. If the glaciers disappear, then they will no longer be able to supply the lakes and the rivers. As they are melting, you have more water around, flooding, and lakes are full. But once they disappear, then that's it. Then there is no more. There is truly a global problem. It's the first time that the world has come together on such an issue and tried to be proactive. Whether we're doing it fast enough, I don't think so.
While people are becoming increasingly aware of the effects of climate change, what's not as well known is the impact we are having on other species.
We are in the midst of a mass extinction, but the news has not reached the general public. They are utterly unaware that the sacred and talismanic and heartbreakingly loved companions of ours on this earth are about to disappear forever. They will not return. African lions are on the absolute verge of extinction. There are only 20,000 left. That's down 90% in the past few decades. Every species and subspecies of tiger on the planet is on the absolute verge of extinction. Elephants, down 90% in the past century. 90% of all large fish are gone from the oceans. Scientists, oceanographers were astounded and panicked by what they found. Half of all species of life may be extinct in 50 years. And what this means is that we don't have 50 years to solve this problem. We don't have 20 years. We have a decade.
Nothing this destructive has happened in 65 million years. I mean, why is that not our central concern? It's overwhelming. No one imagined it could happen. So suddenly, we're confronted with this fact, and we don't really know how to respond to it. I think that's beyond most of us, because we haven't deepened our hearts in a way that would make possible the grief that is wanting to be felt.
We've seen the impact that the dream of the modern world is having on the environment and other species. But how is it affecting the human family? One of the primary expectations people have of the modern industrial system has been that by growing the economy, life will get better for everyone, that we are continually moving toward a more socially just world. But is this true?
When I was growing up, I always thought that, of course, the world will become more equal. There'll be more people educated, people will get jobs, and, we'll all be better off. We'll all be more prosperous. However, what has happened in the last 20 years or so is the world has become more unequal. This idea that the poor will be kind of helped to come along, even though the rich get richer, this hasn't actually worked out to be true.
We all know that a great disparity currently exists between rich and poor. One way to understand this disparity is to think of the Earth as a community of 100 people. People around the world are starting to realize that climate disruption, pollution, and other environmental problems will soon have an impact on the way they live. But for millions of others, it already has. The movement to address this has a name: environmental justice.
Environmental justice is the belief that no community should have to bear the brunt of a disproportionate amount of environmental burdens and not enjoy any environmental benefits. But right now, race and class are the most excellent indicators as to where you're going to find the good stuff like parks and trees and where you're going to find the bad stuff like waste facilities or power plants. And around the world, that is something that you see.
In the United States, Native Americans continue to be marginalized and have their natural resources appropriated.
All of this energy that's being mined on our lands doesn't go to our people. The people who live on Black Mesa, the people who live right off of the coal mine area, don't have electricity. They don't even have running water. All of that electricity goes to California, Las Vegas, Phoenix. Our lands have been labeled the National Sacrifice Area. That's when we stood up and said, hey, this isn't a sacrifice area. This is where I have 2 kids. I want to raise them here.
One way to look at the dynamics of environmental injustice comes from the United States in this excerpt from a film by Annie Leonard called The Story of Stuff.
And our problem is not just that we're using too much stuff, but we're using more than our share. We have 5% of the world's population, but we're using 30% of the world's resources and creating 30% of the world's waste. So my country's response to this limitation is simply to go take somebody else's. This is the third world, which some would say is another word for our stuff that somehow got on somebody else's land. So what does that look like? The same thing, trashing the place. Globally, 200,000 people a day are moving from environments that have sustained them for generations into cities, many to live in slums. So you see, it's not just resources that are wasted along this system, but people too. Whole communities get wasted.
In many parts of the world, especially once colonized countries, where local people still have no control over their natural resources, the industrial world's demand for oil, minerals, and timber is having devastating effects on the land, air, water, and people. An example is the Niger Delta of Nigeria, where hundreds of millions of dollars of oil have been extracted and exported, yet most of the people live in poverty on less than $1 a day.
And because of the oil activities in this place, a lot of people who go to fishing can't even catch fish. The aquatic life is destroyed.
See, the cassava, they don't rot to finish. The oil now spoil and like this. So our plantain, cassava, cocoyam, everything don't die finish.
All our food, all our fish die finish.
The community asked us to go and do the cleanup. I was 5 months pregnant. I miscarried. We are 9 women who miscarried.
Oil should be a blessing, not cost to our land. But I think it's a cost to our land now. We are dying here.
What we do not understand is that we humans are only part of this ecosystem. And when we kill part of this system, we are killing ourselves.
The principle of social justice is that there is a social contract. We are not just individuals. We are part of a society, a worldwide society. We're interdependent, and that interdependence flows at many levels. It's spiritual, it is psychological, it is economic. The notion that we can exist and prosper just individually, based purely on what we do and what we earn, is a rather new notion in history, and it doesn't work.
I think for a lot of people who are born in privilege, there's a sense of what a friend of mine calls the right not to know. I don't have to know about poverty. I don't have to know about racism. I don't have to know about environmental degradation or environmental justice or injustice, because it's not me. I've got my life and I've got my family and I can do what I want. But the world is not forgiving of that much anymore. Pollution carries, water runs out in rich places too. The forests are coming down everywhere. The fish in the sea are depleting. It's hurting us all. Yes, it's hurting the poor first, but it's very, very difficult to go through life anymore and not see it and not feel it at some level personally.
A socially just world is a world in which if you had to draw a lot and it would put you anywhere in that society, you would feel perfectly confident. You wouldn't be worried because you knew whatever lot you drew would be a good lot. It doesn't mean everything's equal. It just means that every single person in that society has a decent shot at living the fullest life that they can. But if you close your eyes and you think to yourself, would you want to be black? Would you trade places? Well, if you wouldn't trade places, then there's work to be done.
Those of us in the modern world have had access to more money, more food, more comfort, more entertainment, more travel, and more communication than any people who have ever lived. But has all this made us happier?
De la société de consommation moderne est un modèle qui nous emmène vers une catastrophe sur tous les plans. Le monde aujourd'hui est en crise. Crise économique, crise financière, crise énergétique, crise de sens.
There is a great loneliness of spirit today. We're trying to cope in the face of what seems to be overwhelming evidence that who we are doesn't matter. Meanwhile, we're yearning for connection with each other, with ourselves, with the powers of nature, the possibilities of being alive. When that tension arises, we feel pain. And then we cover that over with anything that we can use to disconnect and to go away.
El problema es que hemos creado necesidades artificiales que nos hacen consumir mucho más de lo que realmente necesitamos para vivir.
The reason that people are into this mass consumption nightmare dream is because people are lonely and people are hurt and people really believe that more income, more stuff, more consumption, more things, the relationship with things will fix the hunger in the human heart. And it will never work.
This is not the best of all possible worlds, even though it appears that way on TV and advertisements. I think people in their most poignant and honest moments will admit this is really hard right now for everybody.
The idea that material gain leads to personal fulfillment has been demonstrated not to be the case. Although incomes have skyrocketed in economically advanced countries, study after study has shown that levels of reported happiness have remained the same or even declined.
For people of my generation who are just coming into their experience of despair, as the details of what's happening around the globe become clearer and begin to click into place, there's no language for us quite yet. I think it must be unprecedented on an individual level, on a human level, that we are facing that kind of loss.
The anguish we feel for what is happening to our world is inevitable and normal and even healthy. So pain is very useful. Just don't be afraid of it.
Because if we are afraid to feel that, we won't feel where it comes from. And where it comes from is love. Our love for this world. That's what is going to pull us through.
There's a possibility of embracing that pain and that grief in a way that it becomes a strength, a power to respond. That the energy that has been bound in the repression of it can now flow through us and energize us, make us clearer, more alive, more passionate, committed, courageous, determined people.
Now that we've looked squarely at where we are, a good question to ask might be, how did an intelligent, well-meaning species, who for the most part only wanted to make the world better and more secure for their children, end up in such a condition? What could possibly explain how we got into our current predicament? How did we get here? Someone who looked deeply at this question was Thomas Berry, a cultural historian and cosmologist who spent much of his life examining the relationship between humans and the community of life on Earth.
The great work of our times, I would say, is moving the human community from its present situation as a destructive presence on the planet to a benign or mutually enhancing presence. It's that simple.
Thomas Berry says that the primary problem with Western civilization is that it creates and perpetuates a radical separation between the human world and the natural world. That we've given all the rights to the human and no rights to the natural world. We think we're behaving very rationally, that we're on this kind of logical economic course, but actually we're heading toward our destruction, and the only way to explain it is that we've been locked into a kind of mythic entrancement, a worldview that's become dysfunctional and therefore destructive.
According to Thomas Berry, our industrial age could be characterized as a period of technological entrancement, in which our obsession with progress has us marching toward an ill-defined magical paradise somewhere in the future. A future in which we have mastered the earth and everything on it without any limits. And so, it could be said that we in the modern world are living in a kind of trance. Indigenous people would call this trance the dream of the modern world. This dream could also be called our current worldview, a way of seeing the world we're not even aware that we have. A worldview is held in place by a set of beliefs and unexamined assumptions that we're completely unaware of. Like glasses we've worn so long, we don't even know we're looking through them anymore. People's actions correlate with their worldview. We take actions consistent with how we see the world. And often, those actions produce outcomes we didn't predict or intend. So when our actions produce outcomes we're not intending, it's important to identify the unconscious, unexamined assumptions that generated those actions in the first place.
All the crises we're facing today can be seen as the unintended result of the unexamined assumptions that permeate the modern industrial society and our own thinking. So let's look at some of these unexamined assumptions.
One way to characterize the cosmology that really is at work in our culture is this, that the natural world, the earth, is there for us to satisfy our needs and desires, whatever they might be. So we want to make things, we use the earth, we make things. Or we think of it as something like a lumber yard. In fact, we use the word resource. So the earth is filled with resources that are there for us to use as we see fit. Now, that orientation actually is not that bad so long as humans are not that powerful. But suddenly, when we become so massively present, that orientation turns out to be completely pathological. We can't call a forest a resource. It's filled with amazing beings. We can't call the ocean, with all those fish and marine mammals, resource. Each of these species is the end result of 13.7 billion years of evolution. They're spectacular, they're stupendous. They have a right to be here. So that to think of them as resource and to use them however we like is really what is driving our destruction.
In a world we assume to be full of resources for our use, clear-cutting the forests makes perfect sense. Another example of an unexamined assumption is that competition alone is the fundamental law of nature. But when we really look, does that assumption hold true?
So much sort of pseudoscience has been done trying to show that the world is in competition. Survival of the fittest and all of that. I think human beings are more prone to cooperation and compassion. If you look at the work that's being done in science, it's about cooperation. Cells must cooperate. Species must cooperate. Cooperation rather than competition is the way nature works.
In modern society, Many of us believe that our job as smart shoppers is to get the highest level of comfort and convenience at the lowest possible price. We assume that when we buy something, the price we pay reflects the full cost of making it. According to Annie Leonard in The Story of Stuff, maybe not.
I was walking to work and I wanted to listen to the news. I found this cute little green radio for $4.99. I was standing there in line to buy this thing and I was thinking, how could $4.99 possibly capture the cost of making this radio and getting it into my hands? The metal was probably mined in South Africa. The petroleum was probably drilled in Iraq. The plastics were probably produced in China. And maybe the whole thing was assembled in Mexico. $4.99 wouldn't even pay the rent for the shelf space it occupied until I came along, let alone part of the staff guy's salary who helped me pick it out, or the multiple ocean cruises and truck rides pieces of this radio went on. That's how I realized I didn't pay for the radio. So who did pay? Well, these people paid with the loss of their natural resource space. These people paid with the loss of their clean air, with increasing asthma and cancer rates. All along this system, people pitched in so I could get this radio for $4.99.
We have a lot of unexamined assumptions around money. One of them is that people have equated their own value with money. Even the word success, when we say, are you successful, what we mean is, are you making money? And it eclipses people's genuine worth and value.
When you say you're going to throw something away, where's away? There's no such thing. And where away actually is social justice issues and environmental justice issues. Every plastic bag, plastic cup, plastic to-go container, that is the petroleum complex in Africa, Ecuador, Colombia, Alaska, you name it. Every paper bag, paper plate, paper napkin, that is a forest. Every thing that is called waste or disposable is the ways in which we are saying that it is acceptable to throw our planet and its people away. Disposables are one of the huge magnifiers of how we've lost our connection to the sacred. Just take it for granted that we're going to go to the coffee shop and get coffee that came from an exploited community somewhere where a forest was destroyed for a monoculture, put it in a paper cup that used to be a forest, put a plastic lid on top of it that used to be an indigenous community somewhere in a beautiful area, drink it, and then throw it away where it goes back and pollutes a nature community or a human community at the end. I am so fiercely passionate about it because I know in my heart that as long as we are trashing the planet and trashing each other, a healthy and holistic and healed world is not possible. We cannot have peace on the earth unless we also have peace with the earth.
We don't just have unexamined assumptions about how we relate to the planet. We have underlying assumptions that we haven't examined about how we relate to each other. We have a society that believes that we have throwaway resources, throwaway species, and throwaway people. The same mindset that says, I can ball up this can and throw it away. The same mindset says, I can ball up this child and throw that child into a prison forever for a mistake that child made, similar to the mistake my child might be making with drugs or whatever. That's the core mindset.
The dream of the modern world is constructed almost entirely out of assumptions that have simply been accepted for generations. Questioning these assumptions is a powerful way to begin to awaken from our collective trance.